To show multiple layers, and if one has a transparency, so we can see the other ones underneath.
Okay, so let's take a look here. So what you're saying here is GeoImage. So wait a minute, the generic GeoImage. So just so we understand what we're doing here, the generic GeoImage of, let's do this here. Okay, GeoImage of Spain. The generic GeoImage is just that.
Yeah, by default, satellite.
I see, but this is, but if we were to give specifically ReliefMap here, then we would get just the ReliefMap.
Exactly. So now the question, for example, we have this other layer called Street Map Labels Only, which is transparent except for the labels.
That's a really weird name. What does it have to do with the street map?
It is the labels that the street map has.
That a street map would have.
Would have, exactly.
Like a woodchuck would have. I mean, it's if we had streets, then, I mean, that's kind of weird.
We also have street map, no labels, which is the other part, the complementary part.
Okay, I consider that kind of odd because the fact is that the labels, it has nothing to do with streets. It happens to, often come from OpenStreetMap as it happens, but it has nothing directly to do with streets. It's merely basic labeling, right?
Yes, if we go to very high zoom levels, we would have the names of the streets.
Exactly, but I mean, why don't we just say labeling or labels as a layer type? Forget the fact that it has nothing to do with street maps. I mean, it's just labels, ReliefMap and labels, because, some backgrounds don't have labels, some backgrounds do have labels.
Yes. We could accept that names as well.
But labels implies to me it's just the labels, nothing else.
Well, it is. If I do this, look, that's the whole point. That's what we're saying here, is that if we say, that's the point. These are the disembodied labels. See?
Right.
I feel like this is more than the labels.
What is this?
I feel like the dots are not the labels.
Fair point. Fair point. Well, maybe that needs a different, maybe, do we have the labels only without the dots, or do we only have the dots and the labels?
Right now, we only have these, both things together.
Well, what is the right term for this? I mean, labeling, maybe? Label map? I'm not sure. Which of these things, what do we call satellite imagery? What do we?
So we have satellite and satellite with labels.
And to some extent, it's locations.
Yeah, I don't think locations makes it. I think that's like, this is really weird. Street map, no label. I'm sorry, street map labels only. That's a really weird thing. I think we should call it label.
Think about it in layers, right? I mean, the point of this is building maps with maybe 3, 4, 5 different layers.
No, I understand, but I would recommend calling this labeling.
But it can be labeling of, campgrounds, or labeling of, it can be many different things. It can be railroads, can be roads, can be city labels, can be rivers, can be, like the radar image.
Yeah, I understand.
It's about, but we've designed something that works with all those things.
Yeah, but we've got a certain. I think if we just say labels only, or just labels, that will make sense in this list. I think the word street map there is very inappropriate.
I mean, I would go with city labels, or like.
No, but that's a different thing, Arnaud. Yes, if we can break those apart and say what level of labels they are, we absolutely should do that. But there's also just the generic labels at whatever zoom level you're at. See what I'm saying? Jose, is that correct? That there's one box of all labels at whatever zoom level you're at?
So can I show you an example?
No, I just want Jose's answer to that question.
What do you mean by one box?
I mean that whether this is, okay, so let's do an example here. So if I say here, geo range arrow, 20 miles, okay? I'm going to start getting...
You still have country. So that's taking the center of the country.
I'm aware.
Okay.
But what I'm starting to see here is all kinds of random street labels, right?
Yes, I think we have Francisco here. I think these are called shields in general.
Yes, hi. These are, so in the label layer we had all the things with words, and they include also the shields, which are also labels with some square, used in general for roads, for example.
Fine.
And that's something we have in this layer, but maybe that's something we will want to split in different layers. I don't know.
Yes, okay, fair enough. Our node is sending. Do you want to share our node, or should I just pull up your community post?
No, just pull up that page and scroll to the about halfway down the page. There's a good example of a different layer, which is just hiking trails in the UK. Go up a little bit. Yeah, right there. So that's it. Oh, yeah, down. Yeah. So that's hiking maps. That's also a layer. So you cannot just. I think you cannot just call that one street map layer just
I
like
understand.
labels or something.
I understand, but we've got right now a thing that we are providing, which is the aggregate of all labeling layers, right? That's what this named feature is here. Now, this list should probably get a lot longer and should have different kinds of label layers. Am I making sense?
Yes, though we are working in the direction of separating the labels to graphics part, not raster part, as this is. Which will be nice.
So to have the text labels, as actual text strings.
Right.
Yes, right. But okay, fine. But the question of whether GeoImage does that and how GeoImage does it and whether it rasterizes them is a separate question. That's in GeoGraphics, obviously it will try and do that. In GeoImage, it will probably rasterize the whatever is done with raw vector, labeling. Makes sense?
Right. Yes, but probably rather than having a language in the geo styling argument, we should have the geo labels option having that language for specification of which type of labels you want.
Fair enough. Okay. But so then here we could simply have a layer. Well, I don't really know how that will work, but I can imagine different layers here. I can also imagine that mapping into right-hand sides for geo labels.
Right. What we could do is what you are saying, having a labels layer here, which is going to extract whatever was produced by the geolabel option and rasterize it.
That's fine. Okay, but let's take a look at what you're doing here.
Yeah, so the basic idea is simply having a list of layers which are overlaid one after another. And so the order matters.
I think that's fine. Arno, do you object to that?
Sorry, I was pulling up something else. What was the question?
This design, geo background of a sequence of layers in order, bottom to top.
I know, but what does it have to do with backgrounds? I mean, because now you have one background layer, right, which is like that has to be non-transparent, has to be opaque, and then there's things that are transparent on top. So those are not really background things anymore.
Sorry, I don't understand.
They're all background. This is GeoGraphics, so it's got graphics primitives.
So that all that is
the way I see it is that there is one background image, right? That's like a satellite image, or it's like a anything that's completely opaque, non-transparent, and then there's layers that lay on top of that, like labels or trails or railroads or any sort of other theme layers.
The point. I mean,
right? Those are not backgrounds.
Well, let's see. We could have in the first argument a sequence of polygons, each one containing a geostyling with a different layer. We could do that as well, right? But the simplest thing in general is having layers that cover the whole map. And aligning them in geo background, it seems like the simplest thing to do.
And anyway, all these layers are the background of any input you put in the first argument of GeoGraphics.
Exactly.
So that's what maybe we should have some examples of that, Jose, on how you could put any points, geomarkers, etc. And all this is the background of this input.
Right, which is exactly correct.
Yeah.
What is this here?
So this is a more complicated case in which we are mixing here the relief map is a raster layer, then the country borders is a vector layer with all the borders of the country, and it takes parameters specifying the colors of the oceans, the land, borders, etc.
Wow.
So this is quite useful when you want to.
Have we already crossed the bridge of having this kind of syntax or not?
Yes. It's there. It's documented, and Vitaly, for example, uses it a lot with his black colors.
But wait a minute, in geostyling.
In geostyling, yeah. So GeoBackground is a geostyling. It's just that when it is just a string, we can avoid the.
Where is that? Where is this form documented with ocean arrow white and so on?
Yes, it will be probably in scope.
Okay, but is it documented up here where it needs to be?
Probably here it's not.
Okay, so it should be.
It should be, yes. But I think I'm sure they have examples in scope.
Okay, I understand that there are examples, but that's not enough, right? I mean, so yeah, okay, we get that.
The coastlines and country borders should have examples of different colors. Yeah, that one, for example.
Yeah, okay, so that's completely unmentioned above, which
yes, it should be, yes.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I wonder if we should extend these country borders to any political border in general and have a way to specify the level, for example. That would be nice.
Well, I think I would leave country borders as a named thing.
No, sure. Yeah.
Administrative division borders, and then maybe one of the parameters is something about the level, or we could just say, we should be able to say state borders or first level administrative division borders or something. I don't know what the right name is, and I don't know what, but I agree that that's highly desirable to be able to get that. So I'm a little bit confused. Why are these things here, like country borders, not available in GeoImage, or are they? Are they available as a background option?
Well, the ones that are vectorial are not available because GeoImage is going to produce, and we could rasterize them.
We should have a compatible set available here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the other thing is, based on our actual data reduction, we should allow a whole bunch of other different layers, right? Like roads only, like, I don't know, parks, cities, whatever else. Does that make sense? Francisco, does that make sense to you?
Yes. So well, that will mean adding these layers to our GeoServer, but they all will use the same database. So they are not really going to use more database, only more tiles in the pre-computed cache. But I think that's fine because they are not that large, really.
Fine.
All these that have many empty space are not that large.
Fine. Seems like a good thing to do. So we need to get names for those things.
So this last example is also imitating what Arnaud was doing, which is calling layers from different GeoServers.
Yes.
And so this is a way of showing that by using the GeoServer option of GeoStyling, not the one of GeoGraphics, we can do that as well.
By the way, let me ask this question. Is in these GeoServer things, do you have to know all the detail here, or could you just say, could you just give that part? Is the rest of it standardized?
Well, that's what we're talking about. If you go to the community post in the background, you can name all of those things, like scroll up a little bit. You see where it says GeoService. Like, we can do something like that. I don't know if it has to be exactly like that, but that's the idea, like symbolically naming, those URLs.
What I'm not sure if we can do that in a legal term. I mean, what I mean is that not all these services allow you to expose or.
So that's a separate issue which we can get somebody to look at. This is very similar to Service Connect, where sometimes you would have to get authenticated and you have to get credentials for that service.
Right. Yes, so we are working on that direction of adding additional protocols of communication with a GeoServer, and some of them, more modern ones, allow you to download a file that contains all the information about the server. What we have right now forces you to specify all the details of the GeoServer. And if they have some non-standard tile sizes or whatever, you will have to specify that in advance.
Right. So this GeoService wrapper, you might say Service Connect to one of these things. You might give all your credentials and so on, and then you can call GeoService. Does that make sense?
Yes. For example, with Digital Globe, we are not doing that exactly, but something equivalent, which also needs authentication and things like that, or will need eventually.
Or an API key. Some just have an API key. Like you can get the API key online, and then it is provided.
Right, so then you would say GeoService authentication arrow whatever, and that's fine too. Okay.
So those are some examples of that.
That's great.
Naming the tile servers and doing the translation from like the.
That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting thing. So this concept of, so the main concept that you're introducing here is a different concept than the first one we were talking about, is a GeoService concept. Right? But now, where are the tiles? I don't quite understand. No, I don't understand this at all. There are two different things here. One is the GeoServer. Where are you getting this stuff from? And the other is, what are you getting? I don't quite understand I would have thought.
Well, right now, that's basically.
I see. It's within the geostyling that you're specifying for that particular styling. But I don't understand. The typical thing is that you go to one of these places and it is the default return from that place that you want to get as the styling.
Yes, so that street map is dummy here.
Some third-party services have multiple layers, so there's slightly different URLs for different layers.
Okay, but maybe we have to name those as different GeoServices.
Not necessarily. I think if we do a good job doing this protocol connection, that will be an argument inside this protocol connection, which layer to connect. For example, in a TMS service, in a, I don't know, WMS.
I see what you're saying. But so what you're suggesting here, instead of geostyling, I mean, this doesn't seem like the right thing here. This is, I mean, essentially what this is geo background arrow. I don't know whether we want to call it GeoService.
Well, a geo background option is always a geostyling, and I think it's useful if after downloading the image from the GeoServer, we can still process it with further options of the geostyling.
Okay, but I don't think you want to then say GeoServer. Don't you just want to be able to say geostyling of GeoService?
But why GeoService?
Well, I think it's kind of wrong, okay? But the point is that you don't want three levels of indirection here, of having to come up with a name which it might not have any of. The fundamental thing is the railway map or whatever it is, right, is whatever is being returned by that external service is the payload you want to return here. That is, I want my geo background to be, or my geo, whatever it is, or my thing in a polygon or whatever I'm doing. I want that to be, the thing that is rendered in the map. right?
Maybe instead of GeoService should be GeoLayer or something like that.
Possibly, but then, I mean, external GeoLayer would be I don't think this is quite the right name. I'm confused. There are two different things we're trying to deal with here. Okay, so back at the beginning of this discussion, we're saying that we want an additional set of internally named layers that we have pre-curated. Yes, we agree?
Yes.
Okay. So we've got our own curated layers, and then part two, and within our own curated layers, we have this mechanism of saying geostyling of this named layer here.
Right. ReliefMap is just an abbreviation of geostyling ReliefMap.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so now the issue is, what do we do with an external GeoServer which potentially has a default layer in it? And I suppose what we could do is just elide this and say here, just allow an elision. I mean, that might be the best thing to do, is just say this.
Yeah, it could be automatic or something.
Yeah, just do that.
Right.
Okay, and now the third layer of this is something where we're saying, wait a minute. Where's this opacity thing?
That's the second argument or the third argument of geostyling, which, sorry, I misplaced it. It should be in the second argument.
Okay, so then the GeoServer would come last.
Yes, I misplaced it.
But this is very weird because this would have a directive. I mean, this is not disambiguatable.
Exactly. That's why I think automatic would be nicer. Yes. So yes, I misplaced that. So,
okay, so then here, this would end up becoming GeoService of OSM, let's say, or whatever it is, right? Because that's the symbolic wrapper, potentially with authentication arrow, whatever it is, right?
Right. So what we are doing right now is that it's a bit like projections. We take, instead of a string, we take a list in which the first argument is a string, say digital globe or something, with a list of parameters. So GeoService here could be a list simply. And then this would be also understood.
Yeah. I think it might be nice to have an actual notion of a GeoService, which could have a summary blob that represents it and things like this.
Yeah.
I don't know how prominent these are. How many of these are there? I mean, are there hundreds of these that we could be tying into?
Potentially, yeah.
There are many, yes.
Well, and I think this is more or less what we should do. And I think that we can have a list of GeoServices, which again will need, documentation pages, just like we have lists of, service connections and so on, right? Okay, what else do we have to figure out here? This looks great. I mean, it looks like a good thing. Is there anything else to figure out here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, seems good. And I support the idea of having a GeoService.
Okay, and in this, we could embed all these concepts of different protocols, I think, Jose. So that
yes,
sure, yeah.
Okay, terrific, great. Let's move on to the subject.
Okay, so I think Francisco and Brett perhaps can leave, unless they are interested in this discussion, which is very interesting.
Oh, could we?
I'm sure it's interesting, but I'm going to drop out.
See you later.
If we can keep everything in Celsius, will be great.
Okay, so the main question here is the fact that we are using quantity with a temperature unit in two different ways. And we have had some complaints from users. And this is an example. If you divide 1 over quantity of 1 degree Celsius,
you get garbage.
Well, I think we get currently what is the right thing for quantity, but users expect it to be able to transform to kelvins automatically. And so the users expect the second one, not the first one. And so the point is that with this current language, we have no way of specifying the difference unless we use a different name for a unit. And the suggestion is to follow the difference between data object and quantity and introduce a separate object called temperature.
Okay. Let's ask a couple of questions here, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, first of all, what other things are there in the world like temperature? Are there entropy things that are like temperature, or is temperature a unique? Michael, let's go, physics philosophy here. I mean, temperature obviously has a very specific, why are we in this bind with temperature? What's special about temperature?
Okay, I think that there are very few PQs that we use with respect to reference quantities that we measure linearly. And temperature is just by far the most common one. The only other one that is even reasonably common is pressure.
Why is pressure measured with respect to a reference?
Because we live in a normal reference pressure of 1 atmosphere.
I see what you're saying. So it's a pressure. So when we say, well, I mean, we have an absolute pressure of, 2 millitorr or something, which is relative to the vacuum. Are you saying the overpressure?
No, typically we measure with respect to our current air pressure. Typically we don't measure pressure again vacuum.
Wait a minute, but that's not true. I mean, when you say it's, 1013 millibars or something, that's relative to the vacuum. That's not relative to...
Yes, but sometimes people refer to the difference with respect to some standard pressure.
Okay, but that's a different thing. I mean, are we supporting that?
No, but I'm saying it's like if you put pressure in your tire, you measure against air pressure. You don't measure against...
In the case of your tire, but not for meteorological pressure, for example.
That's correct. I didn't say all, but many pressures, or not. Pressures and temperature are the only ones that typically are measured against references.
Okay, but pressure only sometimes measured against...
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But temperature also, like in the moment you use absolute one, you're not against the reference.
Right. What about all the things with concentration, with international units and all those weird things? Aren't those done with respect to a reference, somehow with respect to references?
I don't think so. I think they are just basically conversions to certain absolute ones. They're not with respect to...
I see.
Like 50 AU vitamin A is not against 20 AU base.
Yeah, okay. All right, what about... okay, so there are other things... what about decibels and things? Those are...
Yeah, that's a different story.
Those are exponential units or logarithmic units or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But why are those...
Yeah, we are planning to treat those separately. And those will need also special treatment. But it's a very different discussion.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So here there is an implementation. If you evaluate the section code, then we can play with examples.
It's really weird to have a temperature object. Maybe.
Let's go to this is the code. You can go directly to the example section. So again, it's a bit like data object. It could have even its own type setting. This is just a simple implementation. And the thing with temperature is that they have scales, which are like calendars for data object.
Yeah, I understand. So your concept is there is a temperature. I mean, I don't understand. In a sense, we could say the same thing. There is a length, and it is merely a scale that says whether it's measured in meters or feet.
Well, the thing with temperatures is that because people didn't know that there was an absolute zero, they started measuring temperature from random places. And now that we know that there is an absolute temperature, we have this mixture of situations in which sometimes temperature is used finely and sometimes it's used linearly. And again, to me, this is exactly like we have discovered now that the universe had a beginning. So we could measure dates from the beginning of the universe. It's just that Because we don't know it with enough precision, and it would be a huge number, we will not do it. But yeah, many of the comments we get from users with respect to temperatures, because they are trying to use the standard physics formulas with 1/T or T to the 4, etc. And they expect our quantities of 1 Celsius to work there by automatically converting to Kelvin. And it doesn't work, it cannot work.
So sorry, but what happens when they want this as a difference of temperature? That's the...
Well, if you subtract 2 temperature objects here, they will give you a quantity. It's exactly like that object.
I see.
Right. The idea
That's interesting.
Partition temperature into absolute or outside temperature is a temperature expression, and a difference between temperatures is a quantity. Because the problem we run into with quantity outside of simple use of temperatures, which we sort of broke into, we have degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Fahrenheit difference. But as soon as you end up with a compound quantity or a compound unit where you say it's 3 degrees Fahrenheit per meter, suddenly that degrees Fahrenheit unit should be at absolute temperature, but in any reasonable usage, it's actually referring to a difference in temperature, which is where some of the quirky behavior comes in, because the same unit used in a quantity in combination with another unit suddenly takes on a different meaning.
Yeah, but this combination unit thing, I'm a little confused here. Okay, so the main issue you're claiming is that this is a linear scale on which the numerical value depends on where you put the 0.
Right.
I mean, in the case of a length, yeah, there's a very well-defined 0. The thing has no length, so to speak.
Exactly.
So the question is, so the problem is, and as you're giving the analogy of time, where there is no natural 0 of time until you know the universe has a beginning.
Exactly.
So, and the issue with temperature is that once we know what temperature is, and we know that, at some temperature, kind of the atoms stop in somewhere, there's no kinetic energy or whatever. Well, there is, but it's not, there's 0 point energy, but we're not going to talk about that. What else is like that? Isn't entropy like that too? That it has entropy, one might think, people thought entropy was like that, but it's not. Because ultimately there is only 1 degree of freedom there, or there's only 1 possible state, and so the entropy is 0. And that's what ties the thing to a 0.
Right.
But people thought that entropy was relative. I mean, it's the other way around from the temperature issue.
Mm-hmm. So, I think the only other analogy would be potentials. Potentials also may have a 0.
Yes. Yeah, well, okay, so let's think about that for a second. Okay, so electric potential has the same issue of potential difference versus, if you say inverse volts, why aren't you getting the same issue with inverse volts?
Well, I think because there are no formulas in which you have to divide with respect to a natural 0.
Right. I think the issue is that we have dedicated units for the absolute and relative forms, whereas with potentials, there's just the same units. There is no absolute potential unit.
Well, hold on. I'm confused by that. So this is the statement. With electric potential, there is no absolute 0. There's no natural absolute 0 of potential. Is that a true statement, or is that, I don't know, it's the potential at infinity somewhere?
No, I think that's a true statement. Right, that's the starting point of QED. You have gauge invariance.
Yeah, fair point. Okay, so the claim for potential is because of gauge invariance. Basically, there is no well-defined 0. And the analogy of that with temperature, isn't there some whole Carotheriary theory of temperature or something that has some whole analogy with transformations like that? I don't remember how it works. But in any case, there is a well-defined, there is no gauge invariance, so to speak, with respect to temperature, because there is an absolute zero. What about, okay, to ask what about the gravitational potential? And that's a can of worms, but the gauge invariance there is of something quite different, if I'm not mistaken. We got enough relativists on this call. Somebody should be able to answer that. Is there an absolute value of gravitational potential?
I don't think there is. It's just that there is a convenient one in some problems, but
correct. There is no absolute gravitational potential.
But just for my education, the gauge invariance with respect to whatever it is, the diffeomorphism group or whatever it is, I mean, is that equivalent to saying that there isn't? Is that equivalent to the same thing as the QED scalar one? Or is it not?
I would say it's related, but I wouldn't go as far as saying it's equivalent.
Fair enough. But okay, so you believe that for fundamental physics reasons, there is no absolute zero of gravitational potential?
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the other things? So that's a differences only. By the way, I don't even know whether we have units. What are the units of gravitational potential?
Well, it's joules per kilograms. Or
there is something called Galileos, gals for the potential.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And
right.
It's used in GeoService.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Gravitational potential works as a PQ.
Fair enough. Okay, but so I'm sorry, I'm poking this issue a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Trying to understand why temperature is special.
Right. So to me, something which is quite interesting is that one of these scales, there's an example at the L, it's called the Delisle scale, happens to go backwards. So it has the freezing point of water at 100 and the boiling point of water at 0. So with this construction, we can implement this scale. While, for example, with quantity, it's impossible to have a quantity in which you add positive numbers and it gives you something smaller. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this unit, we don't even have it in the quantity framework because the quantity framework, even in alpha, cannot support it. And very interestingly, the original Celsius scale happened to go in this way as well. It had the 0 at boiling point and 100 at freezing point. And it was reversed the same year that Celsius died by somebody else.
By Linnaeus. I had no idea he was involved. Okay.
But in a sense, this shows that this object has the full flexibility of implementing even a scale that goes in the opposite direction.
Wait a minute. But are you saying, I mean, for other cases, like obviously right ascension, AKA, or latitude, longitude, those things, I mean, they have a conventional way of going, and we have no great interest in supporting them going backwards.
We don't, but for example, longitude, astronomers use longitude in the opposite direction because it's more convenient for them to look at the sky. And now this is something that has been changing in the last 50 years or so because it confused everybody else, so they are switching back to our standard convention. But for many years...
But so declination, are you talking about declination right ascension type stuff, or are you talking about something different?
I'm saying that for convenience and looking at the sky, astronomers use longitude on the Earth in the opposite direction, increasing towards the west.
Great. Okay, but you're saying that convention is being reversed?
Yes, it's not used. There are some books of astronomers starting saying, oh, why are we switching back, given that it was so convenient? But yes, it's being switched.
Okay, but so, look, in general, with these weird and wacky, unit things like temperature units running backwards and so on, I just don't think we have any reason to support those. In other words, there are plenty of things in the history of, in the history of a bunch of these areas. I mean, we could support, I don't know, I don't think we need to support sort of historical bad notational ideas.
I'm not saying we do. I'm just saying that this shows that this is the right framework to support the general case. And if we wanted to implement that, it would be very easy to do with a geoprojection. We could have a geoprojection which has longitude reversed. So you see, I'm trying to say that this is the right framework to work with.
Okay, let's look back at what you're proposing here. So you're proposing, it just seems so arbitrary to pick out temperature as the only, physical quantity for which one has to do this. I mean, you're pointing out the date is another one.
Right. These are the super fundamental ones for people. And I think the fact that it also has a nice typesetting could also help people that know nothing about absolute temperatures, things like that.
To not be confused.
Right.
Okay, let me ask another random one. So let's take the SI base units, right? Mm-hmm. So let's just go through them. Okay, so temperature is one. What about illumination? Isn't that another one?
Temperature is not a unit.
I mean the base. What are they called? The 5 or 6 things. What's that?
The dimensions. Yeah.
They intentionally actually stay clear from naming them.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, but there's a list of them, right? Length,
yes.
mass, length, time, etc. Right.
Yeah.
One of those is candelas or something, right?
Yeah.
Is illumination.
Yeah.
Does that have a well-defined zero?
This is even worse because this is with respect to the human eye. That's a subjective unit.
What?
The conversion is with respect to the human eye. It's not an objective thing.
Okay. But so are you saying, I mean, what I'm trying to poke at is whether there are other units. Okay, so let's say we do something like this for temperature. Are there going to be other really random units like, chili pepper scales or something that start coming out of the woodwork needing to have the same thing done to them? Because the question is whether we want some kind of, quantity scale object that is a general way of doing this or whether we do it specifically for temperature.
I think with respect to real human usage, temperature is probably special. But you can, of course, measure everything with respect to something.
Yes, I understand. Well, I mean, it would be pretty silly to measure length with respect to something. To start with, a thing with 0 length and to say, well, no, that's actually length minus 12.
Well, think of elevation. Where do you start measuring elevation?
Yeah, that's a good example.
But the continent drift, it would be silly to give it an absolute scale. You give it with respect to the continent distance, say, the year 2000. Do not give 12 digits.
You mean 2 millimeters per year or something?
Yes, exactly.
Is a position difference, so to speak.
Yeah.
But so explain to me why, if I were to take the continental drift and I were to divide by the continental drift, for example, I won't get a stupid answer in the same way that I would get.
No, like if you would say, what's the distance between the continents, not the drift?
Mm-hmm.
The drift is fine because the constant goes away.
But you're saying the distance between the continents, then what?
You would typically only speak about the change of the distance between two continents. You would never speak about the physical absolute distance.
Yeah, okay. So what's the analogy for temperature?
But you only speak about 20 degrees.
Which is a temperature difference.
Exactly.
But yet, the formula for, a half kT is an absolute temperature. The conversion to energy involves an absolute temperature.
Right.
So what's your point here?
No, my point, you said one doesn't do it for length. There might well be cases where you do it for length.
Like elevation, I think that's the best case.
Or the LIGO, like you measure this tiny difference in the change of the arms. You don't measure the length of the arms.
Okay, let's go through what this temperature object is supposed to have. And I unfortunately have to go to another meeting in a minute. And this is not quite as horrifying as I thought it would be. I'm still trying to understand. Okay, so you're proposing this temperature thing, which represents an absolute temperature. Well, it represents a temperature that is neither absolute nor anything. It's just a free-floating temperature in the sense that a date is a free-floating date that isn't with respect to 0 AD, isn't with respect to the origin of the Jewish calendar, isn't with respect to the beginning of the universe type thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And that's why it has a scale, not a unit. Exactly in the same way that data objects have calendars, not time units.
Well, it's interesting. And you think it is not a generalizable concept?
Not to other units. This is, for example, this is like calendars for data objects and like projections for geo objects.
I think it's generalizable, but it's nothing that people typically need or do.
Yeah.
So we can find equivalent concepts.
What is this? Why is there a picture of a thermometer here but not here?
That I was discussing with Michael, that the kelvins are typically used by physicists, and physicists would not like the thermometer. And I agree with that. So that's the only reason.
But is it your way of indicating that one of them is an absolute thing and one of them is not?
No. They represent exactly the same thing. It's just that we thought physicists would not like.
That's, if I might say so, in the category of kind of weird. But I mean, I personally am not a big fan. I mean, the decoration that we're using for data objects of that little calendar thing, I'm not a huge fan of. I think the smaller and simpler that gets, the better. I mean, it's just losing up a bunch of space, and it's really pretty obvious usually when a date has a particular, I don't know what that really adds.
Mm-hmm. Well,
except that, yeah. So, I mean, is it straightforward? If we agree to do this temperature thing, is the implementation fairly straightforward? Is it obvious what to do, or are there weird cases where... Okay, so what happens if you try and unit convert it, the temperature thing?
Yes, so here it's working with the geoposition model, which is wrapping another geoposition around will do the conversion. So we have three models: the transform model, the convert model, and the geoposition model, say, with a wrapper. So
the geoposition, right, I don't think the wrapper might work, but I think unit convert better work here. But the problem is, what happens if you say unit convert and somebody will just say, oh, I want it in Fahrenheit, but there's a whole Fahrenheit scale story here and so on.
But I don't think unit convert should work here. It's more like temperature convert. It's like in the same way that we have, time zone convert or calendar convert.
Or currency convert.
Right. So this is not changing units. This is changing the scale.
By the way, let me add a horrifying one. I mean, in the world of currency convert, there's all of the conversion between the different precise time measures of, UTC versus, all the things that depend on the glitches in the motion of the Earth, which, like currency conversion, are not predictable. That is, see what I'm saying? I mean, we have not addressed that yet for time.
Right. So Nick and I are planning to have an option.
What's that?
Time system option. In the same way that we have a calendar and other options for time zone, we need another one, which is a time system.
But how do you do the conversion? I mean, the conversion depends on... Wait a minute. How do you do that conversion then?
With historical data. We need to know historical data.
Okay, but if it was for the future, what would you do?
We cannot. It's absolutely
impossible. Just give an error message.
Yeah, we cannot extrapolate.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Just like if you ask for currency conversion for future, tough luck.
Exactly. But people do worry about exact amount of times in the past.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question about these unit conversions of temperatures. So right now, for example, if you convert 5 degrees Celsius, it will use the conversion with the whole formula, not only let's say the factor between, for example, when you go to Fahrenheit. But that's equivalent to what you want to do with this temperature conversion, isn't it?
Exactly, because I think a quantity of 5 degrees is a temperature difference. So it should convert just by multiplying by a linear factor.
But wouldn't that be a problem for if we start changing quantity to be this other way of conversion?
Yeah, what is the transition plan if we do that? Because we have a bunch of places, obviously, where people have 20 degrees centigrade is treated as a quantity.
Yes. So my view of this is that this is fixing an ambiguity. Now, yes, we are going to change the cases in which the input was ambiguous. So some people will have to change something, but it's going to fix bugs that have been reported because people expected the other interpretation.
Well, the other question is, what does control equals 20C actually do? I think most people would expect that to give your new temperature scale type thing. Right? 20C, they don't think is a temperature difference usually.
And this is what it should do in the future.
Is to give this temperature object rather than giving the thing which can be interpreted. But now, if somebody writes, I mean, it's so confusing. If somebody says something plus control equals, 20C, then that would be a temperature difference in that case. And if we could do it, if we could look at the context for the control equals, then we could tell that.
What did you say?
If somebody is typing something like, let's imagine that they typed, I mean, this is a very nasty case, 20C, okay, absolute, thing on a temperature scale plus 5C, okay? I mean, I have no idea what this does right now, okay. That's pretty funky.
It does that because you're using the same unit. We have some forgiveness in here, again, because of the ambiguity.
Well, I mean, that's not obviously wrong. That is not, that seems like it's actually right.
Right. It's implicitly understanding that one of those needs to be a temperature difference unit. But if you say plus 5F.
Oh, let me do this one. That's a horrifying thing.
Yeah, because it doesn't know which of those is the reference value.
Yeah, that's not bad.
For comparison, if you do that on the Alpha website, you get something fairly different because it handles those inputs differently. It interprets them in a way that I still have some trouble parsing out.
Yeah, but because we can put the assumptions as something more meaningful in Alpha.
Right.
But these operations are now ambiguous. So by using, it's a few lines before, temperatures and quantities, no matter in which scales or units they are.
We'll get it right.
It's all meaningful.
But for control
equals here, this first one you would do, what would happen if you tried to add two temperature objects? I mean, if you add two dates, you presumably get a stupid answer, right? If I say today plus tomorrow.
It refuses to do anything. With temperatures, there is always the way out of saying, oh, you want the formula in Kelvin and how to convert to Kelvin. And this is probably what most people will want because we have formulas like 1 over T to the 4th, and things like that. These are all formulas in which what we are saying is no matter in which scale you are, convert to a Kelvin and continue.
I would be a little bit reluctant with this one. You have some heated metal bar and you look the expansion and you heat a little bit more and you add, so you don't want to go to totals.
But when you add a bit more, then you have a quantity. You have to be careful with it.
I know, but I'm saying it's not, yes, we could.
Right, but of course, things like Newton's law of cooling want temperature difference.
Yeah. So that's my whole point, that you will be able to clearly specify whether you want one or the other.
Right. So Sandra on our live stream is reminding us about our Kelvin's difference unit.
Right.
What is the relationship? What is the story with the difference? We've already got this notion of a difference unit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the story is that the appropriate committees of BIPM, NIST, especially in the US version document NIST SB 811, say that the handling of temperature and temperature difference units being Kelvin is not ideal, and one should be very careful to differentiate between temperatures and temperature differences. But the official use of a second unit temperature difference is not sanctioned, but it's also not wrong.
Well, so what do we do with this? That's yet a third case here. By the way, how recent are these various pronouncements?
20 years.
Okay. Okay, listen, I got to go to a different meeting. We need to continue this. Sigh, this is complicated. I mean, look, the end result will probably be that we'll have this temperature object, probably. I'm just, it just concerns me that we're, it concerns me to distinguish this in that way, because it doesn't, I'm not really totally convinced that it's so different, but maybe it's true. I mean, the elevation case is an interesting one, right? That's another case where there's a very complicated notion of zero. And in fact, well, right. I mean, it's, above ground level, above, mean sea level, all these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, geodesic, etc. Yeah.
Right. The difference there is that we can handle all of that through the current geo framework.
Have we done that? I mean, in Alpha, for example, we do for aviation type stuff, we have whatever it is. AGL is one common one, right? Above ground level. Mm-hmm. And then, we have things like flight level 3.5 and stuff like this, right?
Yeah, but we're not doing any conversions or things. We are just showing the data right now for these things.
But yes. So just so I understand, I mean, in that case, like convert flight level 3.5 to, elevation above ground level.
Mm-hmm. So the right thing to do there is to add the language of vertical datums. So right now, GeoPosition knows all about horizontal datums, but not vertical datums. That's something I'm working on. GeoElevation data has...
So those things which I'm describing, those are talked about as vertical datums. Is that true?
Yes, and you could refer to various notions of sea level and various places chosen for different countries, etc.
That time dependent.
What?
Yes.
They're for instance, dependent on the tides.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Okay. To be continued. This will be interesting, but I got to go and do something else right now. Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys. Thanks to folks on the live stream. Some interesting and good comments. See you all later.